A good cargo dog did not chase blood. He chased what did not belong. Sarah Corvin was halfway out of her shift, one hand on the strap of her watch, when the ambulance came in through the wrong gate. Not the lit trauma bay at the front of the clinic. The cargo gate behind the building, where oxygen cages rusted, medical waste got picked up, and refrigerated deliveries waited when the port traffic snarled itself into knots. Tires shrieked over wet concrete. Red emergency light smeared across loading doors and dented metal. Diesel sat low in the salt air. Behind it all, steady as a bad thought, a reefer unit hummed from the dark lane beyond the fence. Havoc changed before she fully turned. No bark, no warning growl. He locked up from shoulders to muzzle, breath flattening, leash pulling hard against her bare palm. The rear doors burst open. A man on a gurney came out bleeding through a gray doc jacket while two medics shouted for room. Everybody looked at the blood. Havoc did not. He fixed on the cold white crate strapped across the back of the rig, ears forward, head tipped a fraction, as though the wounded man had stopped being the center of the room. Sarah moved with the gurney, clearing the path with one hand while the rest of her kept count. Male, 30s, awake enough to fight the straps, too steady for that much blood. Caleb Jensen pushed through the inner door, dragging on gloves, full of night shift caffeine and borrowed certainty. "Rear gate?" he snapped, already annoyed by the shape of the problem. One medic muttered about a blocked front lane and angled the gurney toward the treatment room. Havoc planted so hard, his nails clicked, once on the concrete, and then held. He leaned toward the crate, not lunging, simply insisting. Sarah followed the line of his body, white cooler skin, industrial latch, frost shining wrong along the lower seam. Somebody had slapped a hospital biohazard sticker over a shipping label without peeling the old one off clean. Damp had lifted both edges. "Move the dog," one medic said. Sarah shortened the leash half an inch and felt the answer come through it, a hard, physical refusal. Havoc never misplaces his footing. He isn't smelling blood. He's smelling what's inside that crate. Caleb threw the box a quick look, then looked back at the man on the gurney and chose the obvious problem, which was what most sane people would do. Inside, the treatment room was all white light and old, cold air, smelling of antiseptic, wet canvas, and coffee burned down to bitterness. Sarah cut the jacket open while Caleb hung fluids and asked questions in the fast, easy voice people used when they wanted chaos to stay polite. Dock worker, fall, metal edge. Simple. The patient answered too slow, then too fast. Sarah pressed gauze to the wound in his side. He flinched with real pain, but the cut itself was shallow, messy, more theatrical than fatal. Enough blood to scare a driver. Not enough to paint the back of that ambulance, unless somebody had helped the scene along. She checked breathing, watched the skin around the wound move, listened to the pattern. Nothing there matched the amount of panic outside. Through the wired glass pane in the door, she could still see the crate on the loading pad, one corner strapped to a dolly under the security light. One medic had drifted back toward it instead of staying near his patient. That bothered her more than the cut. Caleb was talking about sutures now. Sarah barely heard him. The reefer hum outside dropped, caught, and kicked again. Her eyes went to the loose edge of the shipping sticker. Something thin and soft was trapped under it, too soft to be tape. She stepped back into the damp night before Caleb could stop her. The crate breathed cold against her face, too cold for a quick hospital transfer, sweating frost along one hinge. The medic suddenly found other things to do. One lit a cigarette with his back turned. The other fussed with a strap that was already tight. Sarah slid 2 fingers under the curled barcode label and peeled. The glue came away with a wet tearing sound. A hospital wristband came with it, folded and snagged under the plastic as if it had been trapped there in a hurry. Adult, female. No name left clear, only part of an ID number and a smeared timestamp. Beneath it sat a shipping tag with a yard code, lane block, and route stripe marked in black. 2 systems on the same object. No honest reason for that. Behind her, Havoc's breathing flattened again. The dog had not moved. Sarah glanced through the treatment room glass. The man on the gurney had raised his head. He was not looking at his wound. He was looking at the rear doors. Then the ambulance engine snarled. One medic vaulted into the cab. The other climbed in without meeting her eyes. The vehicle jerked away from the clinic, leaving the wounded man behind, the cold crate on the pad, and a damp wristband in Sarah's hand. The man woke like he had been hauled up out of black water. No groan, no curse, no hand going to the cut in his side. His eyes opened and went straight to the camera in the corner of the room, then to the second one above the cabinet, then to the glass in the door. Sarah watched the order of it and felt something inside her settle into a colder shape. The room smelled of alcohol prep, old air conditioning dust, and the sour edge of fear sweat drying on skin. Caleb was at the chart station reading numbers under his breath, the way some people talk to themselves when they wanted the world to stay procedural. Havoc stood just outside the doorway, silent, one shoulder against the frame, still listening for whatever had left with that ambulance. Sarah irrigated the cut and watched the patient's face instead of the wound. He flinched at touch, sure, but he kept listening toward the rear lot, toward the sound that was no longer there. People with honest injuries usually wanted relief, reassurance, somebody to hold still for them. This one wanted exits. He wanted witnesses counted and cameras placed. That mattered more than the blood did. Caleb came in with fresh dressings tucked under one arm and the chart under the other, trying hard to sound like the grown-up in the room. He was good with clear emergencies, fast hands, clean instincts. The trouble started when the scene lied, and he fell in love with the first version of it. He looked at the cut, at the grime on the man's sleeve, at the abrasions along the ribs, and nodded to himself. Fell from scaffold 4, abrasions and contusions. He said it with the confidence of a kid turning in homework early. Sarah kept working. She trimmed away another strip of cloth, checked the wound margin, and let the silence make him uncomfortable. The patient breathed through his mouth now, shallow and measured. Sarah ran her eyes over clavicle, sternum, forearm, dock grit in the creases, rust dust at the cuff. Not much swelling where a real fall from steel should have left its opinion. "Where is scaffold 4?" she asked. "Maintenance lane, dockside." She slid 2 fingers under the patient's wrist to check perfusion and felt him try to yank away before he caught himself. It wasn't the pain he feared. It was the scrutiny of a proper examination. Caleb heard the difference. Maybe. He filled the room with more words after that, adding details nobody had asked for. Sarah let him talk. Men with bad reads usually decorated them when they started to feel them slipping. She turned the patient's hand into the light. The palm wasn't scraped, nor was the heel torn up from breaking a fall. Instead, there was a narrow ring of bruising around the wrist. 2 hard pressure grooves almost parallel, one darker, where whatever had cinched there had shifted under strain. The skin between them was rubbed raw in a direction a scaffold cable would not make. Sarah touched the edge lightly. The patient jerked so hard, the monitor lead snapped taut. Caleb finally came close enough to see the shape, instead of the story. Scaffold cables don't leave figure-8 knots on wrists, Caleb. These are restraint marks. Caleb's mouth opened, closed. "You don't know what that is," the patient said. "Too fast, too flat. Useful." Sarah checked the other wrist. Same pattern, older on one side, fresher on the other. Higher on the forearm were faint drag marks, where fabric had ridden up and skin had taken the floor. She felt that clean, narrow irritation she got when the world offered her the lazy version and expected gratitude. No heat, just sharper focus. Caleb saw it and took half a step back. Smart move. Sarah cleaned the cut again and watched the patient watch the door. Like pain was negotiable, but time was not. The chart waited on the counter where Caleb had dropped it. Sarah picked it up with gloved fingers and read from the top. Time in. Mechanism of injury. Temporary ID. No union number. No site supervisor. No proper transfer note from the ambulance crew. Sloppy enough to be exhaustion. Sloppy enough to be deliberate. At the lower edge, hidden by a damp fold in the paper, something showed through in grease pencil. A number, not part of the printed form. 17. She held the page flatter. The patient saw that, and his breathing changed. Not faster, just smaller, tighter. Caleb lowered his voice, the way people did when they thought they were being reasonable. If she wrote restraint without support, admin would come for both of them. Diversion cases had already made everybody twitchy. There it was. The real bill. Paperwork. Liability. A complaint with her name on it before sunrise. Then don't support it, she said. Just don't lie for it. The patient moved then, sudden and stupid, reaching for the jacket folded on the chair. Sarah got there first. Something stiff slipped from the inner seam and hit the tile with a flat little click. A laminated cargo chit, bent corner, block code, hand-scratched number. 17 again. Caleb stared. Out in the hall, Havoc rose without a sound. Sarah looked at the chit, then at the man, then at the door that led back to the cargo lot. The night had not stayed in one room. It was moving, and if she signed this off as clean, she would be the one who gave it cover. The Reefer hum found Sarah before Chloe did. It came through the clinic glass as a low, steady animal sound, too heavy to be background. Paper on the dispatch counter fluttered every time the compressor outside kicked over, and the fluorescent strip above the monitors kept stuttering. Sarah crossed the hall with the cargo chit in one hand and the patient's intake sheet in the other, smelling alcohol prep and fierce sweat on her gloves. Havoc moved beside her without crowding, then stopped at the corner by dispatch, watching the outer lot through the glass. Ears forward, head slightly off-center. Not a hard alert. Not yet. The kind that said the world had shifted shape, and he'd noticed it before anyone else wanted to. Behind her, the clinic kept doing what institutions did when something ugly slipped under the door. Phones rang. A printer coughed. Somebody laughed too loudly at nothing. Chloe Bates sat at the dispatch station in a blue cardigan with a headset crooked against one ear, fingers moving fast over the keyboard. She glanced up once, took in Sarah's face, the gloves, the dog, and looked back down. Sarah set both papers on the counter. I need Yard B routing and any live movement tied to this code. Chloe's eyes dropped to the cargo chit, then flicked away fast. You need a supervisor for that. Her tone was flat, almost bored, but Sarah saw the pulse beat, once at the base of her throat. Sarah slid the chit closer. Then call 1. Chloe touched 2 keys, brought up a yard map, and angled the monitor just enough to keep it on her side of useful. This isn't your lane, doctor. The Reefer shuddered through the wall again, heavy enough to vibrate the counter under Sarah's wrist, not close enough to be on the loading pad, not far enough to be scrapyard dead. Sarah watched Chloe watch the screen, not the data, the corners, the access log, the tiny fear of leaving fingerprints on the wrong part of the system. People lying for themselves always had that look. Havoc changed his angle by a few degrees and fixed on the outer fence line. Sarah didn't look at him. She let the pressure of that small movement settle into the room. Chloe clicked into the routing pane, then just as quickly threw another window over it. Too late. Sarah had already seen the number, 17. Lane assignment live for less than 4 minutes. Tagged inactive in the status column. Pull that back. Chloe kept her hand on the mouse. System says container 17 is sitting dead in the scrapyard. The line came out too fast. Sarah turned and looked through the glass toward the black yard beyond the clinic. Sodium light, wet asphalt, chain link, drifting salt mist. The hum hit again, deeper now, with the faint metallic rattle of something under motion. Paperwork can sit dead, she said, but its compressor is howling. Those old Reefer units echo, Sound carries. Not through cinder block like that. Sarah tapped the screen with one gloved finger. Inactive units don't cycle under load. Dead units don't push vibration through a countertop. Chloe's jaw tightened. It was pure, calculated math rather than malice. She was adding up which answer lost her the least. If I open a live manifest without authorization, they audit me. If I alter one, they terminate me. If this is a clerical mismatch and you drag ops into it, they'll ask who gave you access. Caleb appeared at the end of the hall, saw the posture on both women, and stopped. Havoc's breathing changed. One shallow pause, one exhale, and his head turned toward the side lot gate. Relevant, not final. Sarah marked it and kept her eyes on Chloe. She leaned over the counter, not crowding, just close enough that Chloe had to stop pretending this was policy. On the hidden pane behind the status window, a route string flashed and vanished. Yard B to holding lane. Then reroute pending. Not scrap, not dead, moving. Sarah reached for the mouse. Chloe caught her wrist. It was a weak grab, more panic than force, but it told the truth anyway. "Don't do this to me," Chloe said softly. "I flagged an omission already. That's all I could do without getting buried." Sarah looked at her hand, then at her face. Chloe let go at once. What omission? The ambulance chain didn't match the intake destination. Transfer ID came through with a cargo prefix for half a second, then got overwritten. I told myself it was a dispatch glitch. I still need this job. The reefer hum rolled through the building again, harder, and Sarah felt it in the lip of the counter. 17 was not sitting anywhere. It was under load and moving. Havoc lifted one paw and set it down, ears hard, eyes on the fence. Sarah copied the yard code from the chit, the partial route string from memory, and the holding lane number Chloe had failed to hide fast enough. Then she opened the locker by dispatch and pulled out the old weather shell she kept rolled behind spare scrubs. Dark, plain, nothing tactical unless you knew what to look for. Sarah peeled off her white coat, folded it once, and left it on the chair. The clinic lights buzzed overhead. The reefer kept howling somewhere out in the wet dark. "If anyone asks," she said, zipping the jacket to her throat, "you tried to stop me." Then she took Havoc's leash, felt him come alive at her side, and walked out of the safe part of the building before common sense could catch up. The broken alarm started before they found the blood. It bleeded somewhere out in the yard in a sick, repeating cycle. Not loud enough to call help, just loud enough to make the fog feel meaner. Sarah came through the chain gate with Havoc at her side, and the air immediately changed texture. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and tired bodies. The yard smelled like diesel, salt, hot wiring, and metal that had sweated all night. Halogen light leaked through the mist in thick, yellow slabs. Ahead of her, a fresh fan of red marked the fence mesh shoulder high, bright and wrong, while the man supposed to be at the center of the accident lay 3 yards away near a pallet jack, too far, too clean a distance. Havoc stopped, muscles tight, scanning the dark between stacks. Sarah took one look at the fence, one at the body on the concrete, and went to the part that still had a pulse. He was young, maybe 25, coveralls half unzipped, one leg trapped under a twisted section of light scaffold that looked placed rather than fallen. Real injury this time. Blood spilling heavily around his glove, where he had tried and failed to clamp it himself. His skin had gone that waxy gray that made clocks appear in a medic's head, whether she wanted them or not. Sarah dropped to her knees in the wet grit, gloves slick in seconds, and shoved pressure into the wound while her eyes kept moving. "Easy," she said, because panic stole air. The blood was hot through the latex, thick and slippery, already cooling at the edges, where it met the morning damp. Havoc circled once and posted up at her back, facing outward, body pointed toward the dark gap between a reefer line and a stack of scrap bins. Sarah tore open the trauma pack she'd grabbed from the clinic and worked by feel more than sight, compressing, anchoring, checking the rhythm of the bleed, then the face, then the hands. She muttered under her breath as she tightened the improvised tourniquet. Blood doesn't splatter upwind. They staged this after the box rolled out. The kid heard none of it. Good. It wasn't for him. It was for the part of her brain that needed the pieces, said Plain, before it committed. A normal observer would have seen an industrial accident and a bleeding worker under bad lights. Sarah saw the seams. The scaffold section pinning his leg had no matching scrape line behind it, no gouge track in the concrete where it should have slid or bounced. The pooled liquid under him was real enough, but the spray on the fence came from a different angle entirely, cast hard against the wind, pushing in off the water from left to right. She could feel that wind on the damp edge of her collar every few seconds. Nothing about the pattern on the mesh agreed with where the body lay now. She kept one hand locked on the pressure dressing and looked around the scene the way she'd learned to read bad rooms years ago. Not hunting drama, just disobedient facts. A dropped wrench sat too neatly beside the pallet jack. A hard hat lay upside down with no crack in it. One boot print in the blood pointed toward the fence, another toward the lane, but neither matched the kid's size. Havoc's head shifted sharply toward the lane that ran deeper into the yard. It offered a definitive direction rather than absolute certainty. Sarah took it, filed it, kept working. The kid's pulse steadied a fraction under her fingers. Not safe. Just less close to dead. When the bleeding finally slowed enough for the next half-minute to belong to her instead of fate, Sarah rose into a crouch and walked the geometry. She measured the wind with her face, the angle of the spray with her eyes, the drip line down the fence where the first impact had hit high and started running. Fresh, less than 10 minutes, maybe less than 5. She looked at the equipment placement next. Whoever had dressed the set had overcommitted. The pallet jack was pointed toward the clinic road, not toward the loading lane where anyone using it would have been working. The scaffold section had one side wet with diesel sheen and the other dry, dropped after the spill, then turned. Near the lane, she found what mattered more than the props. Deep tire marks from a heavy truck cutting through soft mud at speed, twin tracks biting hard, then correcting toward the reefer blocks. Bigger than maintenance equipment, recent enough that the edges still held water. She followed them until they vanished into the fog and rows of stacked containers. The yard had not been frozen at all. It had been busy, selective, and lying about it. The alarm gave another sick bleat. Somewhere deeper in the stacks, a metal latch clanged, then silence folded back over it. Sarah checked the dressing one last time, propped the injured worker just enough to keep his airway honest, and looked again at the fence sprayed with blood that had flown the wrong way. The cover story was done. Somebody had hurt this man for real, then built a prettier lie around him to buy time for whatever mattered more. Havoc stood rigid now, one forepaw lifted, staring into the lane where the truck prints disappeared. Sarah followed the tracks to the black mouth of the container yard, grabbed the trauma bag, and headed toward the reefer rows where container 17 had gone. The reefer stacks stood in wet rows under bad yellow light, their sides sweating in the fog. Sarah followed the tire tracks into B4 with Havoc close enough that the leash kept tapping her leg. The yard smelled like cold steel, salt, diesel soot, and something sharper underneath it all, a burnt electrical tang that did not belong in open air. Container 17 sat 3 rows in, blue paint dulled by weather, looking ordinary until the mist around it started breaking rules. Moisture had gathered in a narrow crawl under one latch plate and along one seam where the steel should have stayed dry. The difference wasn't a matter of mood or intuition. It was strictly temperature. Heat from inside was meeting the cold skin of the box and writing the answer in condensation. Sarah stopped behind a dead generator cart and watched. Havoc froze beside her, not barking, not pulling, just holding a line so tight it hummed through her palm. His chest rose once, shallow, then barely moved at all. Around them, the yard kept up its low industrial mutter, cable clinking somewhere high, water dripping in metallic ticks, a distant fan winding down. The box ahead of them stood apart from the rest because its surface physics had stopped agreeing with the lane around it. She moved closer on the blind side, picking the driest strip of concrete. The first hard sign stayed exactly where she had seen it, condensation crawling where outside cold met heat bleeding through steel. The second came up through her fingertips when she touched the frame. A fine electrical vibration ran through the corner post in short, regular pulses, too steady for loose cargo and too controlled for a dead reefer unit. It faded, returned, faded again in the same rhythm. Somebody had kept current flowing where the paperwork said there should be none. Then came the sound meant to sell the wrong story. A dull bang from inside, followed by a thick sloshing shove against the wall. Havoc twitched at it, but did not commit. That was answer enough. Sarah listened twice. No panic cadence. No body throwing itself at steel. Weight shift. Liquid in a half-full drum or tote. Hitting. Settling. Hitting again. Misleading sign. Nothing more. She crouched by the undercarriage and found the source of the sharp smell. A black cable, patched in by hand beneath the container skirt, wrapped fast with cheap tape and feeding from a portable junction box hidden in shadow. The ozone bite hit stronger there. Someone had jury-rigged power into 17 to keep something alive or controllable inside. She should have backed off then and kept herself invisible. Instead, she thumbed on her flashlight for less than a second, just enough to trace where the illegal feed disappeared into the steel. Half a second was enough to ruin the silence. The beam skipped off wet metal, slid through a gap she had misjudged between stacked empties, and flashed somewhere beyond the lane. Havoc locked hard against her knee. Across the row, a radio cracked alive with static. Then a man's voice came through, low and level. Urgency flattened into procedure. Physical disturbance in yard B4. Cut the feed. Move box 17 now. Victor Thorne. No wasted anger, no questions, just correction. Sarah killed the light and flattened into the strip of darkness beside the wheel housing. But the stillness was already gone. Boot soles slapped steel grating. Someone yanked the illegal line free. The junction box spat one burst of blue-white sparks, and the fine trimmer in the frame died instantly. Havoc's head snapped toward the sound, then back to the container, rereading the board as fast as the men across from them were changing it. Sarah caught a moving shadow at the far end of the lane. Broad shoulders, no wasted motion, gone before she got a clean look. Victor, or one of his people, it hardly mattered. They were not here to investigate. They were here to keep the system moving. The first jolt reached Sarah through the soles of her boots before the engine noise did. Metal clanged at the hitch. The container jerked hard on its chassis, settled, then jerked again as weight transferred forward. Beyond the stacked row, a prime mover coughed to life with a diesel growl that rolled through B4 like trapped weather. The stolen power line lay dead on the ground now, but the wrong place condensation still clung to the seams, proof that heat had lived inside the steel all along. Another heavy knock came from within, followed by that same thick liquid shove, the false signs still trying to pull attention, while the real signs were already enough. Sarah backed clear of the wheel line as the trailer took load. Havoc moved when she moved, silent, every tendon in him drawn tight. Across the lane, a silhouette lifted one arm in a brief signal and vanished. No showdown, no speech. Just competent people closing ranks around a moving secret. The trailer straightened and started out of B4, tires hissing over wet concrete. Sarah snatched up the trauma bag as she pivoted, nearly losing her footing on an oil slick before she caught herself. 17 was leaving. No more room for doubt. Whatever was inside that box needed live feed, urgent reroute, and men like Victor Thorne to guard it. Havoc leaned into the leash. Sarah gave him line and ran. The trailer took the corner, and the yard opened like a trap. Sarah ran after the engine noise, with Havoc driving against the leash, dropping into a maze of stacked steel and machine lanes. The port did not care that she was on foot. It offered mud, grating, blind gaps between containers, and light bad enough to make distance lie. The prime mover hauling 17 stayed mostly out of sight, heard more than seen. A diesel growl cutting in and out through the reefer rows. Havoc kept the line honest, body low, pulling hard enough to force speed without breaking formation. Sarah's breath burned cold going in and hot coming out. Trucks had lanes. Cranes had cycles. Yard drivers hated dead stops. Systems preferred habits. A forklift burst across the next opening, close enough to spray water over her boots. She cut behind it, dragged Havoc through the gap, and kept the engine note in her left ear. Somewhere above, Crane 3 started its swing with a long steel complaint. Trolley lights, moving across the fog. Sarah checked the yard the way she had checked bodies all night, looking for patterns that did not know they were confessing. The trailer could not take the sharper cut between the scrap bins and the fuel cages. It would have to swing east, then double back under the crane line where the lane widened enough to let weight move without jackknifing. She saw the answer a heartbeat before the machinery confirmed it. Crane 3 slowed at the end of its travel, paused, while a spreader bar locked onto a load. Then began its return. That pause opened a blind side on the opposite lane, a few seconds, where a driver would choose cover under moving steel rather than the open stretch by the floodlights. Sarah yanked the leash short and veered right. Havoc, hold. Wait for Crane 3 to clear the blind side. He checked instinct against training, skidded once on damp grit, then matched her cut. The trailer appeared exactly where she had bet it would, headlights flashing through the lattice of the crane legs before vanishing again. Not luck, geometry. She used a parked chassis as cover, then sprinted the next interval while the crane blocked line of sight from the cab. Havoc stayed tight beside her, but she could hear the change in him now. His breaths were shorter, harder at the edge. Backup alarms, chain slap, tire, scream. Yet under all of it, 17 kept moving, like a bad thought inside a bigger machine. The closest call came under the transfer gantry, where broken asphalt gave way to ribbed steel plate, slick with condensation and old oil. Sarah hit it at speed and nearly lost 1 foot sideways. The jolt ran up through her knee and hip hard enough to blur the next step, and the near fall bled directly into the next hazard without giving her a clean reset. Havoc recovered faster than she did, but the steel punished him for it. His front paws struck, slipped, caught again. She heard claws scratch for purchase, where there wasn't any. A yard tug hauled a chained load across the next crossing, forcing her flat against a container wall, while the trailer, with 17, rumbled 2 lanes over, visible only in chopped pieces between moving equipment. She tasted copper from breathing too hard. Every stride after that carried a tax. Still, she kept reading. A driver under pressure would choose the lane with the least obstruction, not the shortest distance. The trailer could not pass the maintenance trench on the west side without slowing to a crawl, which meant it would funnel toward the long corridor under the reefer gantries, where speed could cover exposure. Sarah cut diagonally through a puddled service strip, hauling the trauma bag high so it would not snag. Havoc drove with her, then stumbled once, almost invisibly, a hitch in the line that transmitted straight into her hand. He corrected and kept going. Good dog. Working dog. No magic in it, only discipline and pain deferred. Then the bill came due. They cleared the next corner, just in time to watch the rear lights of the trailer swing left into a broader lane, farther ahead now than Sarah had wanted to admit. She pushed for another burst and felt Havoc check hard at the end of the leash. It was the mechanical refusal of a body hitting its absolute limit. He gave a short, raw sound, more breath than whine, and his gait broke for a step. Sarah stopped because denying reality was slower than facing it. Havoc planted on 3 legs, holding the 4th just clear of the ground. When he set it down again, dark wet marks printed the steel behind him. Blood. Not much yet, but enough. She crouched fast and got a hand under his chest long enough to see the damage. Paw pads abraded, outer edge split, grit embedded where the yard had chewed through skin one hard stride at a time. Heat rolled off him. His breath came in tight, controlled bursts, restrained and ugly, the kind a working dog used when pain had to wait. The trailer growled farther away, swallowed by the larger system of the port. She was not running after one truck anymore. She was running against lane priority, machine timing, transfer schedules, and visibility windows. Havoc lowered the injured paw, tested it, flinched once, and looked back up at her. Ready anyway. Sarah adjusted her grip on the leash and stared into the maze where 17 had disappeared. Their speed was broken. The system had won that round. She got back to her feet and started moving again, slower, angling not for the truck itself, but for wherever the system would have to take it next. The trailer finally bled speed at the loading berth, not with any dramatic skid, but with the reluctance of heavy machinery coming off a timed route. Sarah and Havoc reached the edge of the dock lane half bent over from the run, both breathing like they had borrowed lungs from somebody meaner. Halogen towers washed the pier in flat yellow light over black water. Havoc favored the torn paw now. Not enough to quit, enough to show it cost him every step. Sarah kept her hand low on the leash, feeling the tiny checks as he fought pain and training at the same time. Ahead, the trailer had backed toward a transfer zone between stacked containers and a waiting service crane. Men moved around it with the stripped-down speed of people who had rehearsed this job in other places under other names. Then, the rear door of 17 came up only halfway, and the shape of the night changed. 2 separate loads, not one. A narrow pipe fed through the gap with a slow, mechanical hiss at its end. Air, human air. Off to the side, a hard black case, no bigger than a toolbox, was already being handed down toward the pier road. Havoc heard the same thing she did, a thin, wet drag of breath from inside steel. The dog's ears kicked forward and held, rigid even while the injured paw shook under him. Sarah dropped behind a bollard and made herself think before she moved. That was the curse of knowing triage too well. The body wanted to sprint for the sound. The mind started sorting wounds. One cargo was alive and failing in real time. The other was evidence, portable, valuable, easier to lose forever. Victor had built the split for exactly that reason. He understood responder logic. Force the medic to save what bleeds. Let the proof walk away under guard. The black case moved fast along the service side of the berth, shielded by 2 men and the bulk of a fuel cart. The half-open container stayed where it was, not abandoned, just delayed, long enough to punish the conscience of the one person watching. Sarah tracked the geometry. Distance to the case, distance to the door, time to the waterline crane lift, Havoc's condition, her own oxygen debt. No perfect answer anywhere in it. One of Victor's men yanked the breathing line, checked the flow, and slapped the container wall twice. Inside, a body shifted faintly, female build by the sound of it, lighter, not dead yet. Sarah felt the old split happen inside her, the clean, clinical partitioning she hated and depended on anyway. Savable patient first, salvage second. She did not need to like the choice for it to remain the only honest one. Victor stepped into view to let her know he had been seeing more than she hoped. Dark jacket, radio clipped high, posture loose in the way trained men got when the board was finally behaving. He never raised his voice. "You can't suture 2 fatal wounds at the same time, Doc. Load the freight." The line drifted across the dock as if he were commenting on weather. And that was worse than a threat. One crewman peeled away with the case toward a waiting utility truck. Another started working the container hardware. Sarah saw the plan all at once. Move the witness toward the vessel, move the proof in another direction, make pursuit mathematically impossible for one person and one damaged dog. Havoc braced, wanting to go where she went, but when she shifted the leash, his split paw smeared blood across the painted concrete. That was answer enough. She could force him forward and turn loyalty into damage, or admit what the body in the container was telling her with every thin pull of air. A witness could still speak tomorrow. A drive in the wrong hands might vanish tonight. She hated that the logic remained correct, hated more that Victor knew it would. Sarah unclipped the leash from her belt loop and wrapped it once around a dock cleat, making the motion as slow and deliberate as dressing a wound. The nylon rasped over salt-stiffened steel. She checked the knot by feel, took half a second to settle his weight so the damaged paw would not torque when he lunged, then pressed her forehead to his for a single beat. Stay. Recover enough to move if she needed him. His breath hitched against her cheek, hot and ragged. The case disappeared behind the fuel cart and kept going. Sarah let it go with the part of herself that would be angry later. The water beyond the berth slapped hollow against pilings. Somewhere high above, a crane motor engaged with a deep electrical groan that meant the transfer window was opening whether she was ready or not. She stripped the trauma shears from the bag, checked the half-raised door, and ran for the container. Every stride away from the evidence felt like tearing fabric by hand. Victor did not try to stop her yet. He did not have to. He already had what mattered most to his side. That was the cruelty of the split. Winning one thing while losing another at the same time. Sarah reached the rear locking bars, just as the hidden breathing line gave another weak flutter from inside. Female? She thought again. Alive? Barely. The steel smelled of salt, urine, overheated metal, and fear baked into enclosed heat. Behind her, boots hammered into motion as the guards finally reacted to the choice she had made. In front of her, the box held one life and no forgiveness. Sarah took one hard breath, heard Havoc drag in an answering one from behind the cleat, and drove herself at the half-open door, leaving the evidence to vanish into the machinery of the port. The corridor between the containers narrowed into a man-made throat, steel walls on both sides, damp concrete underfoot, one weak strip of light leaking in from the berth road. Sarah hit it at a run and checked hard when two men stepped into the gap ahead of her. Not dock workers. Wrong stance. Wrong stillness. One carried a short pry bar low by his thigh. The other had a hook knife in reverse grip, tucked close like he knew the lane was too tight for anything theatrical. The half-open container door waited beyond them, 20 yards at most, breathing hot enclosed stink into the night. Maya was in there. The case was already gone. Choice made. Now came the tax on it. Sarah slowed one step and let her eyes work. Drain channel under the left wall. Hydraulic hose bundled along a parked lift frame to her right. Patch of algae dark slick near the seam where seawater blew in and never fully dried. Footing first, angles second. Bones third. Behind her, Havoc strained against the wrapped leash at the cleat, furious at being held out of the lane. But even that anger had gone thin from pain. The man with the pry bar smiled without humor. The knife man just shifted left to close the last clean line to the door. Sarah's phone vibrated once in her jacket pocket. Caleb. She almost ignored it, then didn't. She answered on the move, keeping her voice low. Caleb sounded like he was breathing through his teeth. I don't know what you're doing, Corvin, but I just killed the breakers for Zone B. She looked up at the lighting grid above the berth and saw the fractional delay before darkness took hold. Not all the light. Enough of it. Enough to break certainty. Good, she said, and ended the call. Before he could ask anything else, the men heard only one side and misread it. That bought half a heartbeat. Sarah used it to shift right, toward the parked lift frame and the bundled hydraulic line feeding the stabilizer arm. The pry bar man followed too eagerly. The knife man held center, better instincts, waiting for her to commit. She let her breathing look worse than it was. Let one shoulder dip. Let fatigue sell a lie. The lane smelled of rust, brine, hot rubber, and hydraulic fluid sweating through old seals. She planted one foot on dry concrete, one on the slick edge, and memorized where each man would have to put his weight if they rushed her. Then the breakers died. Overhead lamps snapped out in a stagger instead of all at once, dropping the corridor into chopped dark and afterimage. The pry bar man lunged first, exactly as she had priced him. Sarah gave ground half a step and let his boot hit the algae dark patch. His balance went sideways. She struck his wrist with the trauma shears, just enough to shock the grip open, then kicked the pry bar loose and slammed her forearm across his throat as his back hit the steel wall. No flourish. Just leverage, impact, and the wet grunt of air, leaving a body that had expected an easier job. The knife man was faster. She heard the sole scrape before she saw him, and turned into the parked lift frame as the blade came through where her ribs had been. Metal rang when his forearm struck the frame. Sarah's left hand found the hydraulic hose, yanked it clear of its clip, and ripped the emergency pin with her right. Pressurized fluid spat in a hot stream, slicking his face and chest. He flinched blind for one instant. One was enough. She shoved him hard by the jaw hinge into the descending stabilizer arm as the pressure bled out. The arm dropped only a short distance, but it hit with ugly mechanical finality, pinning him against the frame. He cried out once. The first man tried to rise. Sarah brought the loose pry bar down across his temple in a short arc. He folded and stayed down. Then the knife man's blade caught her on the follow-through, a skipping cut across the top of her shoulder. Hot first, wet second. Pain flared bright and greasy, the kind that made your fingers want to open whether you agreed or not. She felt the warmth spill under the fabric at once, then the colder drag as damp night air hit the torn cloth. Her arm stayed usable, but the margin had narrowed. Sarah stepped back, one hand clamping the shoulder seam before blood could make the grip unreliable. The corridor had gone mostly dark, lit only by spill from the berth and the red blink of a distant signal mast. The half-open container door stood ahead of her now, with no one between. Behind her, Havoc hit the end of the wrapped leash again, gave one ragged, barkless exhale, and then held, trained even in pain. Sarah kicked the drop knife out of reach, not taking it, just removing options. From the berth road came urgent movement, boots changing direction, engines revving, somebody shouting a load number she did not need. Victor was not staying to settle scores. He had a violent ceiling and a schedule. Sarah tore a strip from the hem of her shirt with the trauma shears, jammed it under the shoulder cut, and pressed hard enough to keep the blood where it belonged for a few more minutes. Then she looked up and saw him at the far end of the berth, lit by the edge of a flood lamp restarting on auxiliary power. Victor turned once, and his eyes found her across distance and steel. No surprise in them, just recognition. Then he was gone toward the vessel side, leaving her bleeding in the dark with one living witness still trapped in a box and no clean line left anywhere in the port. Sarah got both hands on the locking handle and pulled. It fought her the way seized metal always did, not dramatically, just with the dead resistance of weight, rust, and bad maintenance. The cut across her shoulder burned under the torn strip of shirt she had jammed into it, and every inch of pressure sent a wet pulse down her arm. Havoc hit the end of the leash behind her and gave one sharp, breathless huff, then held. The door broke free, with a crack that ran down the berth. Heat hit first. Not warmth. Stored human heat trapped inside steel, with bad air and stolen power. Then, the smell came out with it. Urine, old plastic, dried vomit, fear, and the boxed-in stink of somebody trying not to die where freight belonged. Sarah stepped back once, drew one careful breath through her mouth, and forced the second door wider. Darkness swallowed the interior. What little light reached in picked out wall ribs, a water drum on its side, restraints hanging loose, and one body crumpled low against the far corner with bound wrists and chin down on chest. She went in fast, one hand on the wall to keep from slipping. The floor still held trapped heat. The woman in the corner was alive, barely, but alive, early 30s, Asian. Hair pasted to one cheek, lips split white at the edges, skin flushed wrong under grime and sweat. A cheap air canister had been rigged through the half-open door to a tube taped badly near her mouth, improvised and ugly, but enough to keep tissue alive. Sarah cut the restraints first, then checked airway, pupils, pulse, fast, weak, thready. Heat stress on top of dehydration, maybe sedation too. Bruising at the forearms, where she had fought the ties. No obvious chest wound. No fracture that mattered more than the basics. "Stay with me," Sarah said, because bodies still listened even after minds drifted. The woman's eyes opened in jerks and failed to focus. Sarah soaked one sleeve from the water drum and pressed the wet cloth at the neck and sternum. Behind her, the berth kept moving in fragments. Engines farther off. A crane brake, winding down. The receding grind of a vehicle Victor had already used to take what mattered most. Sarah looked once at the wall and saw the clean rectangular scars where a case had been bolted down recently. Bright scrape on old paint. Empty now, gone. The woman coughed and tried for words. Sarah got her partly upright against the container wall and felt how little body weight remained under the sweat-soaked jacket. "Can you tell me your name?" The answer came on the third try, thin and dry. Maya. Good. Breathing first. Everything else later. Sarah lifted the improvised airline away once she was sure Maya could hold her own airway, then checked the wrists again. Deep ligature grooves. Patch mark at one elbow. Maya's gaze finally locked on her, frantic in the way only people who had been trying not to pass out for too long ever looked. They took the drive. I'm just the decoy. The sentence cost her. Sarah saw it in the tremor at her jaw. What drive? Maya swallowed air. Black case, ledger copies, names, routes. Not all of it. Enough. Her eyes flicked toward the birth road. He took the real one, or the rest. Good in one way, terrible in the other. Not a witness who could explain the whole machine. Just one woman used as bait because she knew enough to matter and not enough to protect herself. Maya caught Sarah's forearm weakly. "There are more," she whispered. "Different routes, different ports. I only saw pieces." Sarah checked the berth entrance again, listening harder than she looked. No one was coming back. Victor had taken his win and left her the kind of truth that kept people awake for months. Medical success beside tactical failure. She hated the ratio, but hatred never moved the board. Maya could maybe walk with help, not alone. Sarah leaned out long enough to free Havoc from the cleat and bring him close. He limped at once, split paw leaving dark half-prints, but lifted his head toward Maya and held it there. Not alarm, inventory. Sarah touched his neck once, then turned back into the box. They had opened 17 and pulled one life out of it. But the machine behind it had kept moving. Maya knew maybe half of one layer. The drive was gone. Victor was gone. Morning would bring auditors, bad questions, and people high above the berth, noticing Sarah Corvin had stepped into a lane she was never meant to see. She got Maya's arm over her good shoulder, ignored the hot slide of blood under the bandage at the other, and walked her out into the first gray edge of dawn, carrying only a partial truth and the full price of it. Dawn came in gray first, then in the tired yellow of work lights that had not yet admitted they were losing to morning. Sarah brought Maya out of the container one careful step at a time, the witness's weight draped across her good shoulder, the cut one burning under its makeshift bandage. Havoc limped beside them, close enough to brush her boot now and then, refusing distance, the way working dogs refused surrender. The main port road opened ahead in a long slab of wet concrete, bordered by stacked steel, crane legs, and machinery big enough to make any one person look temporary. Workers from the day shift were already filtering in, lunch pails and clipboards in hand, orange vests half-zipped against the salt wind. One by one, they slowed, then stopped. Not because Sarah looked heroic. She looked bloodied, salt-streaked, and almost finished. Maya could barely keep her head up. Havoc's bad paw left intermittent dark marks on the roadway. The people on the lane took that in and said nothing. Engines still muttered in the background. Backup alarms chirped from farther off. A spreader bar clanked high overhead. The port had not decided yet whether it was about to absorb what had happened or grind it under routine. Then the decision came from above. Doc 7 Miller stood inside the control cabin over the main lane, small behind scratched glass and morning glare, one hand on the rail, the other near the bank of switches that governed more of the yard than most men admitted aloud. He did not wave. He did not lean out. He simply looked down long enough to read the picture correctly. Sarah saw the moment happen, not as kindness, not as pity, but as professional acknowledgement. He knew what it cost to stop flow on a working port after daybreak. Delay claims, audits, supervisors looking for a body to blame. He knew all of it and kept looking. Then his hand moved. One lever first, a second after that. Out beyond the road, a crane froze mid-swing. A reefer unit cut off. Then another. A loader idled down with a shudder that seemed to pull sound out of the air around it. The change went through the berth in layers. Motors died. Fans wound out. Tire scream vanished. Metal settled into stillness. What remained was water against pilings and the rasp of 3 damaged bodies trying to keep going. The floodlights stayed on. More than that, they reoriented. One after another, industrial lamps along the road slewed into fixed angles until their yellow beams crossed and flattened into a narrow corridor running from the container rows toward the clinic access lane. Not pretty, not ceremonial, just practical light, aimed by people who knew how to clear a path without using words. Workers stepped back from the roadway as if some silent signal had gone through them. A forklift driver killed his engine and got out, leaving the machine dead where it sat. 2 riggers pulled a chain bin off the center line by hand. No one clapped. No one thanked her. No one made the mistake of turning it into a movie. That was why it landed as hard as it did. It cost them something to do this. Lost minutes, missed timings, questions later. Sarah kept moving because standing still would have made the whole thing unbearable. Maya stumbled once. Sarah tightened her hold and adjusted her stance without looking up. Havoc kept pace with a rough 3-beat rhythm, favoring the split paw, refusing to break line. The sudden quiet pressed on the eardrums like deep water. By the midpoint of the lane, the first pale edge of sun had found the higher cranes and turned them from black shapes into something harder and more exposed. Daylight was the part no one romanticized. Daylight meant reports, cameras, and statements taken by people who would care more about sequence than motive. It meant Chloe Bates, with her omission log, Caleb Jensen, with breaker records attached to his name, Miller, with a shutdown nobody had authorized, and Sarah, with blood on her clothes, a witness under her hand, and no full proof to buy protection. Victor had the drive, or enough of it. Maya had fragments. Names, maybe. Route patterns, maybe. Nothing neat enough to close the wound in one stitch. The network behind him remained where durable machinery always lived, inside procedures, favors, and contracts. Sarah knew exactly what tomorrow would taste like. Burnt coffee. Institutional caution. Legal language sharpened into weapons. The kind of scrutiny that came not to help, but to reduce liability. She kept walking anyway. At the end of the corridor, the light widened, and ordinary yard noise from the untouched sectors began to creep back in. Cautious at first, then steadier. Machines off. Space given. Cost accepted. It would not protect her after this minute. It was never meant to. She shifted Maya's weight, felt Havoc brush her calf once with his shoulder, and kept moving into the gray daylight, while his ragged breathing closed the distance between one bad night and all the trouble that came after it.